Electronic Frontier Foundation and civil liberties groups like the ACLU and other citizen groups were frozen out of the process completely. The Democrats in Congress literally turned over the process to AT&T, Comcast, and others in order to write this extraordinary law to protect them from consequences for having broken our laws. And so to read about how at the same time they're funding to the tune of many, many millions of dollars the Democratic National Convention is just a very potent illustration of this sleazy process that drives our lawmaking process.
It's interesting, a recent analysis showed Democratic Congress members who changed their vote to support the immunizing of telecom companies in the FISA bill have on average received thousands more from phone companies than those Democrats who voted consistently against immunity. 94 Democrats voted against immunity as recently as March, but changed their votes to support it. And according to maplight.org, these Democrats have received on average $8,000 in telecom contributions over the last 3 years. The 116 Democrats who remained opposed to immunity received on average $5,000.
Right. There's so many levels of the way in which that telecom money and corporate money floods the Congress. I mean, you have direct campaign contributions, and that study that you just described is incredibly insightful about the process. And right before Jay Rockefeller in the Senate became the most vocal advocate for telecom amnesty, huge amounts of telecom money poured into his campaign coffers. And in fact, Wired magazine did a study showing that prior to that, he received virtually no money. And right as telecom amnesty became a big issue, all sorts of telecom executives and companies poured money into his coffers, had campaign parties for him, created this connection, this social and financial connection, and he then became their greatest advocate. On top of that, you have millions and millions and millions of dollars, as Mr. Wiseman described, in lobbying fees from these telecom industries. And then you have the fact that they fund so many of the party apparatus that there's almost very little separation between the party leadership and the telecom industry, and you see that in terms of how the Democratic Congress behaves. I mean, a majority of them voted against telecom amnesty in the House, but far more than enough of them in the House and in the Senate voted in favor of it. And as you say, the ones who did have very strong connections to the telecom industry in terms of contributions and lobbying.
Steve Weissman of the Campaign Finance Institute, your response.
Well, this provokes the memory of what happened in 2004 when the Democrats were collecting money for their convention in Boston, and one of the leading fundraisers was Senator Kennedy. And his major focus, or a major focus, not the major focus, but a major emphasis was on getting drug company money. And at the very same time that Senator Kennedy was soliciting money from the pharmaceutical companies, he softened his position on legislation dealing with Medicare prescription drugs prices. And that played a role in the eventual conference agreement between the House and the Senate on a bill that essentially did not allow the federal government to regulate the price of prescriptions. Now, no drug company could have given Senator Kennedy the kind of money that he was collecting for the convention. No party could have asked a drug company for that money. So you can see, I think, the importance of the convention as fitting into, as Glenn was saying, it fits into a pattern where you have limited contributions the company executives can give, or they can guide through their PACs where they can solicit limited contributions from their executives, lobbying money they're spending, and then on top of it, every 4 years, the corporation can directly from its treasury, or the union, as the SEIU, for example, is doing to both conventions, can give unlimited funds to these parties, and therefore there could be obligations. And some of the key fundraisers, another point that we try to make in our studies, some of the key fundraisers are like bundlers, who bundle limited contributions. They are people who are going to receive the gratitude of people who benefit from their fundraising. And in Denver, Steve Farber, who is a key lawyer, a very prominent, very distinguished lawyer and a community activist, is also a partner in Brownstein Farber, one of the biggest lobbying firms in the United States. and in Washington, D.C., and he's been approaching his clients, whether they're Google, whether United Healthcare, whether they're Quest, and asking them repeatedly for money for the convention. So he's getting together all this money, and we have the irony that we have a Democratic candidate, Senator Obama, who is not taking lobbyist money directly, who is not taking money from PACs that are guided by companies, but who is benefiting from the efforts of his own bundlers, but also someone like Steve Farber, who can bundle money legally, and there's nothing wrong with what he's doing legally, from all of these corporate clients of his. Another illustration, a final illustration of the problems involved in this is who's the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States? It's Henry Paulson. And what is the most prominent thing Henry Paulson had done for the Republican Party before he became Secretary of the Treasury? It was promising, pledging, and apparently making good on his pledge to raise $5 million for the 2004 Republican convention.
How do you think, Steve Weissman, this should change? And also on the issue of finding out who has given money, both to the Democratic and Republican conventions. When do we find out? At this point, you know, something like, what, 26 million of the 112 million?
Right. We only know that voluntarily. Normally, when people pay money that goes into financing ads like the presidential nominating conventions, because they are really ads, you find out fairly soon after the money is given, no more than 3 months afterwards. In this situation, with conventions, because of all the fictions created about host committees and not really political, we have a situation where you don't find out anything till 60 days after the convention, which is practically after or just at about the moment of the presidential election. So there's no opportunity to really know who's funding. There's no opportunity to give feedback to candidates about particular funders. You only find out officially 60 days after the election, after the convention, which is a form of election. And that's at the very moment virtually people are voting. The solution that we have advocated, we meaning the Campaign Finance Institute, which is a nonpartisan research group, convened a multi-partisan group of people and academics and good government people. And they kind of came to this solution. Really was to go back to, to go back to the notion that the conventions may need a little more money than their federal grant, because they get a federal grant of $16 million each, but that this money should be limited, just like all the other contributions that are made. And that would mean that it was hard money, as they call it, rather than soft money. So the solution that our task force favored and that we're expressing, and it was, as I say, a nonpartisan task force, is that the Congress pass a law, and it says no more soft money for these conventions. No corporate treasury, union treasury, no unlimited individual money, because there's some of that in there as well, individuals giving millions. Instead, the parties, let's discard this host committee fiction, the parties can go out there and ask people to help the convention, but with the same limits where they're asking people to help them normally. And that way you would cut down on the soft money aspect, the most corrupting aspect where a business can give millions of dollars.
Steve Weissman, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Associate Director for Policy at the Campaign Finance Institute. Glenn Greenwald, you've also written about the attorney raising the money, Mr. Farber, in your blog.
Right, absolutely. I mean, if you look at, again, he's quite illustrative. I mean, if you look at how he functions, I mean, he is partners in his lobbying firm that Mr. Weissman mentioned, one of the most influential lobbying firms, with a whole slew of highly influential Republicans, including the wife of Charlie Black, John McCain's chief lobbyist / advisor, and the former chairman of the Republican National committee. And so what this is it's a very bipartisan corporate political class that really functions without regard to things like ideological belief or political positions. Democrats, Republicans really don't matter in this world. It's a political and corporate class that is very insulated and has its own interests and ensures that those interests are served by the Congress, no matter which party is in control, and they write their own rules that apply only to them and to nobody else. And it's really at the center of why Americans are so deeply dissatisfied with how our government functions.
Glenn Greenwald, we're going to ask you to stay on the phone. We're going to go to break. Constitutional law attorney, political and legal blogger for Salon.com. And when we come back, we'll also be joined by Cass Sunstein. He is co-author of the book Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness. We'll talk about that, but also talk about some of the issues that we have just raised. Stay with us.